Can I talk about heads? Because some people have come to talk about heads and everyone wants to get home. So let's talk about heads. Too big, too small, funny shapes. So the key thing, funny shapes, there's two things. Is it plagioccephaly, which is going to get better? Or is it craniosynostosis, which is going to get worse? And our job is to work out which it is. Okay, so how do we do that? So let me just remind you that our heads, because we're all adults, is one big bone, like a ball, bowling ball. But a kid's head, because it has to grow, is plates. 5 plates, a few more plates, but 5 major plates. 1 back here, 2 there, 2 at the front. And there are sutures separating the plates. So there's a sagittal suture, sagittal meaning archer, because it goes front to back like an arrow. Sagittal suture. There's the metopic suture, which comes down, and you'll be a bit freaked out when you first feel it, but you'll actually feel a gap right down to above the nose. Yeah, which is the metopic suture, and it can be widely open, and that's fine. And there's the coronal suture, remembering that it's like a tiara, the crown, the coronal suture. And then there's the lambdoid suture, because it's like a lambda from the Greek alphabet at the back, the lambdoid suture. So they're normal. Plagioccephaly has all the sutures open, but there is a slightly abnormal shape to the head. And sometimes you can feel the sutures, but that's not very reliable. But there are some things that you can use to help differentiate it. One of the important ones is that on the flat side, the ear's often forward. And there are lots and lots of things. I'm not going to have time to go into them all, but I want to talk about the practical aspects of how to differentiate them. There's facial difference and all sorts of things. So with plagioccephaly, it's often parallel, and with plagioccephaly, it's often parallel. So the face will be slightly skewed in the same way that the back of the head is. This has gotten much worse since we stopped kids dying with SIDS, because now they lie on their back, they develop a preference, and so they get a flat spot. So it's more common now probably than it ever has been, but it will be parallelograms if it is plagioccephaly, whereas if it is craniosynostosis, it'll often be rhomboid. There is another bit, which is the nose is generally straight if it is plagioccephaly, and it deviates towards the size of the fused suture if it is craniosynostosis. The ear is more anterior in craniosynostosis, in plagioccephaly, and it is posterior if there is craniosynostosis. None of these, not one thing defines everything. By the way, this is on the RCH Clinical Practice Guideline. You don't need to write it down now, but if you're ever wondering, there is a guideline to help you, okay? Take them word for word off that. So, the eyebrows will be different, whereas the eyebrows will generally be the same with plagioccephaly. There may be a difference in eye opening, but if you've got a fused coronal suture, the whole head will be pulled back as you grow. So the eye will go up, the eyebrow will go up, and over time it'll get worse. This is the key thing. This is the key thing. If it's plagioccephaly, it tends to get better, or at least no worse, particularly if you refer to physio or something like that. So it's going to get better. Whereas if it's craniosynostosis, it's a fused suture. As the head grows, it's going to get worse. If you have time, the best thing you can do is follow this kid across time. But if you're getting close to 8 months, then if it's craniosynostosis and you want to do something about cosmesis, you're going to need to refer, because the longer you leave it after that time, the worse the outcomes are going to be, or they're going to say they can't operate at all because you've taken too long and the sutures have started to fuse. So that's sagittal synostosis, and if you've got sagittal synostosis, you'll tend to get relatively bulging head. Coronal synostosis, that's the bulging head, and if you've got sagittal synostosis, you end up like a sprinter, long thin head, I beg your pardon. If you've got one side coronal synostosis, you end up with a higher eye, higher eyebrow, and so on. And if you've got metopic, you will have seen these kids, the kids with the pointy heads, they've got a metopic craniosynostosis. Now, this has changed. When I was a medical student, they taught me very clearly, unless you've got 2 sutures fused, your brain's going to grow fine, and we don't do anything about it, but it actually does cause a cosmetic defect. And so now in 2017, even if there's 1 fused suture, we'll refer them, and the families may take up the option of cracking it, opening it up, pulling the dura up to keep it apart and allowing the head to grow. That's what they do. And it's pretty medieval surgery. Okay. Lambdoids as well. But the key thing is, there are two key take-home messages about the funny shaped head. The clock's ticking at 8 months. You've got to do something, because if you're going to refer, you have to refer, you have to get moving. The earlier you see them, the more time you've got to watch them and decide. What I do, if I get a kid at 3 months, I ask the parents every Sunday afternoon to take a photo, face front on, top of the head, both sides. And then every time I see them, I compare the weekly photos. And the question I'm asking myself is this getting worse or not? Because if it's getting worse, it might be craniosynostosis. If it's kind of getting better, particularly if there's been positioning and all that that's been done with good physiotherapy, it'll tend to get better, or at least not get worse. Depends on the age, I've talked about that. Ideally we watch across time. Remember the radiation. So radiation to a growing head is a real thing, and we try everything in our power not to do it. And if I'm going to make a diagnosis, I won't do a CT scan, because I know they're going to do one down there, because they don't trust our CT scan. And every CT scan I do gives an additional risk of 1 in 500 of childhood tumours. Yep, and so I try very hard not to do them. Okay, so that's heads. Now I didn't mention helmets, but I should mention helmets very quickly. Helmets do have a role, and there is some published evidence that they do change the shape of the head. And the earlier you get onto it, the better. But there's lots that I think we don't know about helmets. You have to wear a helmet, my understanding is 23 hours a day. And by the way, what a helmet does is it shapes the head. So you put it on, earlier the better, no point if your kid's older than a year. With good treatment, you can get 1 or 2 centimetres difference. And if you look at the studies which simply say dichotomous yes or no better outcome, yeah, they produce a better outcome. But it's subtle, it's not life-changing, it's not huge, but there is a difference in cosmetic appearance, is my understanding of helmets. What I think we don't know is what wearing a helmet 23 hours a day means to the sensory experience of the child. Yes, not having your hair stroked. What does that do to attachment? I don't know, but it might be important. So I always offer helmets referral, but I don't push helmet referral, because I think the cosmesis is there, but I don't know what the adverse effects are. But there is a paediatric physiotherapist in the room, and feel free to refer to her at any time. Put your hand up. There you go. Right. So framework for big and small heads. I've run out of time, so I just really want to talk about it quickly. The few things that matter to me is it crossing centiles or not? People are allowed to have big heads, people are allowed to have small heads, but people are not allowed to cross centiles. Yep. And so the first thing I want to know when there is an abnormal reading and people are worried is, what are the other 8 readings that we've had? We invest a lot of money in maternal and child health nurse. Maternal and child health puts a lot of time into documenting good and reliable and reproducible measurements, and they're gold to me, because that's the first thing I want to know is, what's it done across time? The next thing I want to know is, what are the parents' head sizes, because that's their genetic destiny. Remembering that not everybody has the parents they think they have, but I still like to know what the parental head circumferences is. And let me just show you that. When I'm looking at the centiles for parental head circumference, I can never remember the website, but this is how I Google it. Adult head circumference centile. And it's the second hit, not the first hit. It's this one, which is from the National Institutes of Health in the United States. And what it gives me is this. It gives me, on the second page, it gives me charts. And for the height for females and males, depending on your height, what is your head circumference and what is your centile? Yep, so if the mother has a head circumference of 97% and the father has a head circumference of 90%, then I'm not surprised that this child has a big head. That's kind of predictable. Yep. Usually it will grow consistently across time, and so I'll be not very worried anyway. But I find that very helpful. That's the second thing I want to know. First is, what's it done with the centiles? Second is, then the next thing I want to know is there any dysmorphism? Because one thing's less worrying than several things. Is there any difference in development? If it's a big head, only 2 things do a big head, because we don't have Paget's disease in kids. It's either too much brain or too much fluid. Yep. Now that fluid can be subdurals on the outside, chronic subdurals cause macrocephaly. It can be hydrocephalus, or it can be just a really smart kid. No, I'm joking about that, but it can be just genetic big brain. But if it's hydrocephalus or it's subdurals, there'll often be some sort of developmental aspect to it as well. And is there a family history of big heads? And there are, every now and then I diagnose Fragile X based on a big head as the presenting feature and stuff like that. So there are things that we need to think about. And then I'm always interested in particularly for small heads, was there any neonatal resuscitation? A lot of things will have occurred in utero and we don't get any history. But if it's small head, it's usually less brain than usual and that matters. And head injury. But again, if it's small head, you'll get this kind of, that's big head, so that'll be hydrocephalus. That child needs a shunt. And we really should have done the shunt a lot earlier because we'll be compromising neural development even there at 27 months. So I don't worry about this one. This is the 3rd centile and the 15th centile. 15% of the population are allowed to do that. It's following a centile. We don't want to know about those ones. That kid's fine. Whereas this one, I don't even know what this condition is because this one is one where the head circumference has dropped off before length and weight. In fact, weight's never dropped. That's the exact opposite of what we normally see. I pulled this off a Japanese research paper just because I thought it was a nice graph. But usually with failure to thrive and stuff like that, weight goes first, length goes second, and head circumference goes way last. So if it's nutritional, but usually it's, I worry about macrocephaly, which is not microcephaly, which is not familial because it's got a very big risk of associated developmental abnormalities with it. That's all I wanted to say, I think. And I'm sorry I went 8 minutes over.
That's pretty impressive.
Any questions?